Hello and welcome to the Parent Toolbox. My name is Michael Whitehead. I am a marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping families find and discover research-informed tools to create harmony in their families and to be able to use those tools effectively. Today in this video we're going to be talking about the coercion cycle. This is a evidence-based tool or an evidence-based theory that has been shown to increase compliance in families, especially with families where children are oppositional, defiant, or severely aggressive. So let's get started. The first thing to be aware of is there are two very different and distinct definitions with regard to coercion. A lot of times when people hear coercion, they hear of coercive caregiving relationships or coercive relationships in general. Those are not helpful. They are represented by hostility, control, and aggression, and actually decrease relationship dynamics and decrease the relationship harmony. The idea and the foundation of coercive relationships is an emphasis of control over autonomy. So the adult or the one person being in control of somebody else over their own autonomy. What I'm talking about today is something called the coercion theory or the coercion cycle. This is not inherently pathological per se. It happens in all natural relationships, and it is a tool that is used to escape aversive stimuli, meaning anything that anybody, whether it is me or my child or me and my partner, feel there is something that we don't like. We use coercive dynamics or can use coercive dynamics to escape that stimulus that is not helpful or appealing to us. Unfortunately, with the coercion cycle, it builds on itself until it becomes an automatic response within relationships, and that's when it's actually harmful for relationships. So, decades of research from 1970s and on has identified that coercion is actually the nexus or the beginning of aggressive behaviors in kids. Research on oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, antisocial aggression in children points to the coercion cycle as the beginning place for when that happens. The difficult thing is many parents or adults have a hard time recognizing when coercion is taking place, and they have a hard time understanding what the coercion cycle is and how harmful it can be. And so what I want to do is kind of just go real quick through what the coercion cycle looks like and identify ways that you can change those dynamics immediately in your family. So what is the coercion cycle? The best definition is to think about a parent and child command. So if a parent gives a command or a child asks for something, what we have the possibility of happening is compliance. If compliance happens, then other interactions continue as normal. If compliance does not happen, then the command is escalated. That command is then escalated and repeated over and over and over again a couple of times until it continues to escalate. So with each continuation of escalation, then we see that repetition until compliance takes place. If compliance takes place, then other natural interactions continue, and we see the interaction just dissolve and not continue to cause problems. What happens is oftentimes if the escalation does continue, it can continue into aggression or violence. And usually what happens is one person, whether it's the child or the parent, will acquiesce because of the aggression or the violence, and then other interactions continue. The concern is that if we give a command up in this area, then and it continues to escalate to, let's say, this point, and compliance is achieved at this point, then that is where that command will escalate the very next interaction. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're at the store with your child and they throw a fit or they ask for a candy bar, and you say today's not the day for candy bars, and they throw a fit because you won't give them a candy bar. Let's say that interaction repeats itself a couple of times, so they're escalating, they're throwing a fit until the point that they get on the floor and they start kicking and screaming. If that takes place, then what will likely happen is acquiescence, and the parent will comply with that request of wanting a candy bar and give the child a candy bar. Well, the next time that you and the child are at the store, instead of politely asking for a candy bar, the child will then escalate and say they want a candy bar and start yelling and screaming right away because they know that that is what got them compliance. The unfortunate piece to this is that will continue to escalate, right? So at that point, if you're in the store with them and you continue to say no, even if they're throwing a fit, then they're going to throw a bigger fit or a bigger fit or a bigger fit until they get their candy bar or are taken out of the store. And then the next time they go to the store, they're going to have more escalation. So this is how the coercion cycle can continue to evolve and continue to create negative experiences for families. And then we have what happens is changes that take place as a result of the coercion cycle. So there are 5 major changes that take place as a result of the coercion cycle, especially if it becomes really, really entrenched in the family. The number 1 change, the first change, is something called over-inclusive identification. So what this means is when a child gives a very minor or neutral interaction with a parent, then the parent has the potential, if they're entrenched in the coercion cycle, to see that behavior as a negative. They will interpret that behavior as being coercive by nature, and then the parent will escalate in their punishment or their view of the child. So minor or neutral behaviors become seen as very problematic, even if they're not neutral or even if they're not negative. They could just be neutral. It could be just a kid coming in one example, looking at a teacher wrong and then getting suspended for that. So that is a good example of getting this massive change from the coercion cycle. The next change that takes place is negative attribution. So essentially what that means is that the adult or the parent or the caregiver can't name any positive attribute of the child. They look at everything about the child as negative. They look at every behavior as negative, because if the child is actually acting well and has been having a good day, the parent will interpret that as the child is just trying to manipulate me. So the negative attribution of all child behaviors is the second change that takes place in coercion dynamic. The third change that takes place is punishment acceleration. So because parents and caregivers and adults are so used to the escalation in violence or the escalation in aggression or temper tantrums, then they want to avoid that at all possible. And so, like in the example I gave previously, if a child looks at a teacher wrong, they are automatically interpreting that that's going to lead to greater problems, so we just need to punish them and get them out of the school. And so punishment acceleration leads to harsh judgments like scolding, complaining, or threatening that are used over more judicious or timely punishments that actually would change behavior. So then, after that, we have non-responsiveness to social stimuli. So this is where if a child is immersed in the coercion dynamic with any caregivers, whether it's an adult in their life, like a teacher or a parent, they start to not have responsiveness to social reinforcements, like positive social reinforcements that may be given. So telling them they're that you like them, or that they did well on their test, or that they had a good day, they're not going to respond to that. They're going to think that you're trying to manipulate them. They're going to interpret that as a negative. And so encouraging positive relationships or positive social reinforcements is actually not going to work. And the last change that takes place in the coercion dynamic, if it's become fully entrenched, is emotion regulation difficulties. When children are and families are immersed in a relationship that is so coercive, you're going to see a child perform a potentially negative or coercive behavior once every 3 minutes. And then the parents or the adults in those interactions tend to respond in kind. They tend to do something negative or accelerated 1 in every 16 minutes. So as you can see, or as you can tell, if you are in a home or in a classroom where the child is creating negative experiences once every 3 minutes, and that's not going to be very helpful for the teacher or the parent. They're going to feel overwhelmed and exhausted, and they're not going to be able to regulate their emotions, which then leads to them responding negatively once every 16 minutes, which then builds up the child to want to escape that negative aversive stimulus, which then will continue to accelerate and entrench the coercion cycle. So what's to be done? How can we help? What can we do to eliminate the coercion cycle and actually create positive experiences for kids? Fortunately, the research since the 1970s, we know there are several things that we can do, not only as parents, as therapists, or as teachers, but as human beings that will actually decrease the coercive dynamic and make permanent changes for the child. We're going to have to go into more detail on how to apply each of these individually, but a brief, real quick overview of these solutions. The very first solution is non-contingent positive interactions. That means playing with the child, spending time with them that is really child-directed. So oftentimes I'll go home and my son will want to throw a baseball. And that is a non-contingent positive interaction. If I come home and his chores aren't done, or he's had a bad day with mom, or he has been grounded for something, I will still play ball with him for 15-20 minutes, because that is not contingent on any of his negative or positive behavior. The reason for this, the reason we want to do this, is it builds up that relationship and builds up positive experiences for the child so that they don't have that negative responsiveness to positive social stimuli. We'll have to go into a lot more details. You'll have to watch another one of our videos to identify how to do that, because there will be lots of them that will explain this. But this is one of the solutions to the coercion cycle. Then the other solution is the magic ratio. So John Gottman has discovered that if we have 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction, that is balancing the scales, so to speak, in our emotional bank account with anybody in our relationship, whether it's our child or our partner, our marriage partner, or whatnot. So we need to make sure that we are balancing the scales, or possibly depositing things, so having a 7-to-1 positive to negative interaction. So 7 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. So anytime you say no is a negative interaction. Anytime you go and pat your child on the back or give them a hug, that's a positive interaction. The more you do that and balance that scale or increase the positive interactions, the more likely you're going to be able to counter some of those changes from the coercion cycle. Again, that's going to be really hard for a lot of families who are so immersed or have lived in this coercive dynamic for years. So that's another thing that I'll introduce in the next coming videos, is how to do that even when you have these negative experiences. And then the final solution, or the one of the biggest solutions that I think, which is also really hard for parents or caregivers or teachers to do, is to decrease our requests or commands to our child down to 5 per hour. Ironically, or surprisingly, the more we increase or the more commands we give a child, the more likely there is to be a negative coercive dynamic that takes place. In fact, I think the research says about 20 requests per hour is highly correlated to extreme violence between parent and child. So if we can do 5 requests per hour and keep our requests or our commands down to that level, then we are able to actually increase the positive experience that our child has with us, which then will change the dynamic between us and our children. Now, that's going to be really hard. I admit it. It's going to be really hard for families to request or drop their requests down to 5 per hour. But again, in the coming videos, you'll see, or some of our other videos, you'll see different ways to do this. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that this has been helpful. I really appreciate your time and energy in trying to find out better ways to interact with your child. Let me know if you have any requests for videos, and be sure to share.